Welcome, everybody, and Chag Sameach. We are very, very excited to be hosting this webinar this evening. It's the sixth night of Hanukkah, and it is definitely a time when we are looking to spread some light and see some miracles. So welcome to everybody. We've had many, many people signing up for this webinar. And I think it is definitely a sign of the times that now more than ever, we are having a new appreciation for our beautiful homeland, Israel. And many, many people are looking to plan their futures, whether they are going to make Aliyah or whether they want to invest in property. And during this webinar, we have some amazing panelists who have joined us. And we are going to be taking you through a process of all the things that you need to know if you are thinking about a future in Israel. As we say, information is power. So I'm excited to welcome our panelists. Yair Givati, welcome. You are calling in from Australia, so it's a very, very early morning for you. Thank you for joining us. Andrew Album, our financial guru. Welcome, Andrew. Andrew is calling in from Ra'anana. Julian Nathan, Managing Director of Hold. Hi, Julian. You're in Ra'anana, and I'm in Ra'anana as well. Just some house rules. We are very aware that people's time is precious, so we're going to be trying to keep this webinar under an hour. It's going to be divided into 3 segments. I will be posing questions to our panelists who will be presenting on the different topics. We start with Andrew, who will be talking through some financial information for those wanting to make Aliyah. He'll be debriefing some of the key things you need to know about taxes. Then we will go to Yair, who will be talking us through the legal process of actually buying property in Israel. And then we will speak to Julian about some new real estate opportunities and guidance in how you actually choose an apartment in Israel. So you can feel free to post your questions in the chat box. We will have time for Q&A later. And we are going to make this recording available to all those who could not make it here today, for some people. We have people from all over the world tuned in, the United States, the UK, South Africa, Canada, Australia, and of course, Israel. So as they say in Israel, yalla, let's get started. Just as a short intro, Andrew is recognized as one of the few financial advisors in the world that is licensed both in the UK and Israel. He works with market-leading wealth management firms in each country. He has over 30 years of experience, and he guides families from all over the world on how to secure their financial futures. And he is recognized as one of the leading authorities in Aliyah financial planning. Andy, welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you, Nikki. Great to see you. Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach. Andy, everyone is anticipating or guessing what's going to happen to the financial landscape post this current war and the economic situation in Israel. Can you give us some of your insights and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So let me start with a quick elevator pitch, as they say, as to who I am. So as you said, I am with 30 years experience in financial planning, both in the UK, where I'm a senior partner at a company called St James's Place, who are a FTSE 100 company, the largest player in the market in the UK. I'm also a senior advisor at Pioneer Wealth here in Israel. We are the market leading specialists in dealing with English-speaking Olim, new and old from around the world. And that gives me a unique position. I'm also a member of the Australian Institute of Chartered Accountants, so have that Australian qualification as well. Pioneer and St James's Place, just to keep the compliance people happy, are separate companies with no connection to each other. So to answer your question, obviously, Israel is going through a very traumatic time at the moment. The war has been catastrophic in many ways, but the amazing thing, I think, has been the resilience of Israel's economy. For the last 10 years, Israel has been one of the world's strongest countries economically. It's been an economic success story driven by high tech and related industries. In fact, over the last 10 years, up until the beginning of this year, the Israeli shekel was the only currency that strengthened against the US dollar. What we've seen since the war started, of course, was very quickly some panic in the market and some selling as the shekel. But I would suggest that the 12% strengthening in the shekel in the last couple of weeks, which you can see in this graph against the dollar, and it's mirrored against all other major currencies, shows that investors and the markets know that the underlying strength of the Israeli economy remains, and the tech powerhouse will continue to drive Israel to greater economic growth in the years ahead.
Um, can you give us a sense of if people are preparing to make Aliyah, and obviously they are now thinking, how should they invest? What should they invest? What's going to be taxed? Bringing money over to Israel. I know you're an expert on the subject. You've helped many, many families do this before. So can you sort of give us a synopsis of what people need to know?
Okay, thanks. So there's a lot of information. I'm just going to try and condense it into a few brief comments, and then people are welcome to reach out to me directly for further guidance specific to the country they come from. So I think the main thing to say for people that move to Israel is there is a tax exemption on non-shekel investment incomes and gains for the first 10 years. So if you hold non-Israeli assets, non-shekel assets, sorry, they won't be subject to any tax on the investment returns, which gives you a decade living in a tax haven. Should be pointed out that for US Olim, that tax exemption has no real benefit because Americans continue to be taxed on their worldwide income by the IRS, so they don't really gain from that exemption. And if you're continuing to work after Aliyah, that income may be taxed depending on how it's structured, depending on where you're working. So that's probably the first thing to think about. The corollary, though, always from a financial planning perspective, is not just what's the tax exemptions that I can enjoy, but also making sure you don't inadvertently trigger tax liabilities that you are otherwise not aware of or not subject to before you made Aliyah. I do meet lots of people who come to Israel and they end up with problems of income tax and capital gains tax in their home country that they could have otherwise avoided. They may be paying withholding tax on dividends from investments that they weren't aware of. They may be making themselves subject, if they're non-Americans, to US estate tax simply by holding American shares in Microsoft, Google, or Apple, or funds or property in America. You may be creating significant estate tax liabilities that you maybe weren't liable to before you moved to Israel, but because of double tax treaties, you could end up with a very large tax bill to the IRS when you die if you have these kind of assets. And finally, for British people, there's inheritance tax, which you may leave yourself a liability, which you could have quite easily sidestepped with some careful planning. I think the watchword, Nikki, is very much careful planning to both minimize tax and not create other liabilities that you could otherwise have avoided successfully.
Wow, it seems like there's certainly a lot to consider, and definitely suggest that people who are thinking this through should reach out and get your help and guidance. Um, for people who want to invest a large amount of capital in Israel, what are your recommendations? Obviously, this is, we're talking about real estate on the webinar, but I'm interested in your personal thoughts through your experience and with your clients. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, sure. So I would say to start with that for most, if not all investors, real estate is a part of their portfolio and should be a part of the portfolio. What I tried to highlight in my comments a moment ago was that real estate assets left in the country you've emigrated from may create immense tax problems that you could potentially not incur if you were buying property in Israel. And that's something that I know Julian's going to talk about later, and Yair is going to give some input on the legals for that. But to leave property outside of Israel, it can be problematic. If you've got liquid capital to invest that you want to put in a portfolio that you want to be able to have access to quickly and to provide income and flexibility, then I think the four things to focus on are firstly, the importance of diversification. Diversified portfolios are always better than putting all your eggs in one basket. Second thing to think about is what's called home country bias, particularly important for people who've made Aliyah or are making Aliyah from the UK, South Africa, Australia, or Canada. When you lived in that country, you had a lot of money invested in the domestic market because of familiarity primarily. When you come to Israel, those countries are almost irrelevant from a currency perspective and from an asset perspective. You really shouldn't be leaving too much money in those kind of stock markets or bond markets. You really should be diversifying and having something much more appropriate to life in Israel. Third thing you need to think about is matching assets with liabilities. If all your assets are outside of Israel in other currencies and all your expenses are in shekel, you are necessarily creating a shekel risk or an exchange rate risk if the shekel strengthens like it did really non-stop from 2008 to 2022. Real estate property income in Israel in shekel portfolios giving you income is a way to avoid that unnecessary risk. And finally, keep in mind tax, which we've already highlighted, but always important not to forget about tax liabilities.
Home country bias. That's the first that I've heard of that. So that's
Okay.
very interesting. Andy, we are running out of time for your slot, but we're going to come back to you with some Q&A at the end. Do you have any additional tips or recommendations for people watching
Sure,
that they need to think about when they're navigating these decisions?
sure. Very quickly then, first would be think about if you're getting advice where your advisor is based. There's no point in living in Israel and having an advisor thousands of miles away who's inaccessible, who can't come and sit opposite you. And when that advisor retires, you might be left without advice. Second is where is my money and my assets located? Again, having money stranded offshore when you need to bring it to Israel quickly is problematic. If your assets and capital are here, far easier. Third thing is to think about the long term. If you're coming to Israel for the rest of your life, what are the issues going to be in 10, 20, or 30 years' time? Legacy assets you might have left overseas, properties that you're renting out, again in UK, US, Canada, who's going to manage them in your old age? And what about intergenerational issues? If your kids and grandkids are here, again, assets outside of Israel in strange to them markets can be more of a millstone than a real asset. I'm thinking about inheritance and double tax is part of that, but it's too complicated to cover in a sentence now. But always remember, you think about the long term and what you really would want in later retirement, and make sure you put those plans in place now.
Certainly a lot to think about, and I guess the language is a big concern for people as well. I think
Mm,
people making Aliyah really would, they need to know that there are people on the ground in Israel that speak the language, that are
sure,
experts, that have all that experience.
100%.
So thank you so much, Andrew. And what we will do is we will make your details available to everyone who signed up, so people can reach out if they have more questions.